The little black girl knocked at the power shed, crying her mother's bag was taken by workers in uniform. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. It was a hot summer afternoon when little Tamara, no older than 8 years old, knocked on the weathered door of the power shed. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Her small fists clenched tightly around the fabric of her shirt. Tears streamed down her face, and her wide eyes searched for anyone who could help. Please, help me. They took my mom's bag, she cried, her voice cracking as she struggled to catch her breath. The workers inside the shed were caught off guard, pausing their work as the sound of her desperate sobs echoed in the dimly lit space. The air was thick with the scent of diesel and the hum of machinery, but there was something in Tamara's frantic demeanor that made the world outside seem irrelevant. The men, dressed in their standard work uniforms, exchanged puzzled looks. One of them, an older man named Mike, took a cautious step forward. "What's wrong, little one?" he asked gently, his gruff voice attempting to offer comfort. Tamara, still trembling, pointed towards the street. "The men in the uniforms, they took it. They took my mom's bag and said we couldn't have it back. Please, you have to help." The words hit them like a freight train. The men were used to dealing with broken equipment, damaged lines, and the occasional accident, but this was something entirely different. Mike turned to the others, his brow furrowed in confusion. Who were these men, and what had they done? The only thing that was clear was that something was horribly wrong. Without hesitation, Mike turned back to Tamara, squatting down to her level. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere. We'll take care of this." He then stood up, his voice now filled with determination. "We need to find out who did this, and..." "What?" Tamara nodded, her lips trembling as she wiped her eyes, her fear momentarily subdued by the workers' promise. They couldn't leave her alone, not now, not like this. As the men gathered their things, ready to confront whoever had taken Tamara's mother's bag, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was no simple theft. Someone was using their power to hurt an innocent child, and that wasn't something they were going to let slide. The workers were ready to go to any lengths to get to the bottom of this. As they walked toward their vehicles, Tamara watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. Would they find the people who hurt her mother? Or would they be too late? The weight of the unknown hung heavily in the air, and for a moment, it felt as if everything was on the verge of unraveling. Tamara stood at the edge of the power shed, watching the workers drive off, her heart racing as they disappeared into the distance. She had done it. She had told someone. For the first time since the men in uniforms took her mother's bag, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wiped her tear-streaked face and turned back toward the shed, trying to make sense of the words that had just left her mouth. What had really happened? Why did the men in uniforms take her mother's bag? The more she thought about it, the more questions swirled in her mind. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let them get away with it. As the workers pulled into a nearby parking lot, Mike, the older man who had first approached her, stood by the side of his truck, his face serious as he spoke with the others. "We need to find out exactly what happened here, and we need to do it quickly. The little girl's mother is in danger. I can feel it in my bones." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, and the group nodded, ready to act. But as they loaded into their vehicles and began to drive toward the area where the men had taken Tamara's mother's bag, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the urgency of the situation. It was the silence that surrounded them. The streets, usually bustling with life, seemed unusually quiet, almost as though the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. The workers felt the tension in the air, and the closer they got to the street where Tamara's mother had lived, the more they realized they were being watched. "Something's off," one of the workers muttered, glancing in the rearview mirror. "We're not alone." Mike glanced over at the others, his face grim. "Stay sharp. They might be watching us." As they pulled up to the small, run-down house that Tamara and her mother lived in, Mike ordered everyone to park on the side of the road. The workers stepped out of the vehicles, surveying the area with suspicion. They knew they had to be careful, but they also knew they couldn't leave until they had answers. The house was dark, and there was no sign of movement inside. The shutters on the windows were closed tight, and the yard was empty except for a few overgrown bushes. "This place looks abandoned," one of the workers said. "But it's not. I can feel it." The team moved cautiously toward the front door, making sure to stay out of sight. Mike led the way, his hand resting on the handle of his tool belt, ready for anything. As they reached the porch, Mike knocked 3 times on the door. No response. He knocked again. Still nothing. Then, he tried the door handle. It turned easily, and the door creaked open. The house was eerily quiet, and the smell of stale air and dust hung in the room. The workers exchanged uneasy glances as they stepped inside, their footsteps muffled on the old wooden floors. The first room they entered was the living room. It was small, with old furniture covered in sheets. There was no sign of anyone living there. The TV was off, the couch empty. The workers moved deeper into the house, checking every room, but they found nothing. Just silence. But then, as they entered the kitchen, something caught Mike's eye. A piece of paper, crumpled and torn, was lying on the floor near the trash can. He bent down and picked it up. It was a note, hastily written in black ink. "Don't go to the police. You'll regret it." The workers exchanged worried glances. "This is bad," Mike said, his voice low. "We need to find Tamara's mother. Now." They rushed through the rest of the house, moving from room to room, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished. Just then, one of the workers, a younger man named Dave, shouted from the back of the house. "Mike, you need to see this." Mike rushed to the back room, his heart pounding. He entered the room and found Dave standing next to a small, locked closet. The door was slightly ajar, and Mike could see something inside. "What's in there?" he asked, his voice tense. Dave pushed the door open, revealing a small, dark space. Inside, there was a pile of clothes, and in the corner, a small, metal box. Dave reached in and pulled the box out, setting it down on the floor. Mike knelt beside it, his eyes scanning the box's surface. There was something strange about it, something that made his skin crawl. The box had no markings, no labels. Just a simple, plain box. Mike opened the box cautiously, his breath held in his chest. Inside, there was a bundle of cash, along with several photographs. He picked up the first photograph. It was a picture of Tamara's mother, taken in a well-lit room. She was smiling, her eyes full of hope. But next to her, there was another man. A man in a uniform. Mike's heart sank as he recognized the uniform. It was the same uniform the workers had seen the men wearing earlier. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The men who had taken Tamara's mother's bag weren't just thieves. They were part of something much bigger. And now, they had to figure out what it all meant before it was too late. Tamara's heart raced as she sat in the cold, dark corner of the power shed, waiting for Mike and the others to return. The moments felt like hours, each one dragging by as she tried to process everything that had happened. The workers had promised her that they would help, but now that they were gone, she couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. She couldn't forget the way those men in uniforms had looked at her mother's bag, the way their eyes had narrowed as they snatched it away. What did they want with it? What were they hiding? She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the haunting thoughts that crept into her mind. Just when she thought she couldn't take the silence anymore, the sound of a truck engine in the distance broke through. Tamara's heart skipped a beat. She jumped to her feet, looking out of the shed's small window. The workers were back. The truck rolled to a stop, and Mike and the others jumped out, their faces serious, determined. Mike saw Tamara standing by the window and gave her a reassuring nod. "It's all right, kid. We found something," he said, walking toward the door. "We need to talk to you." Tamara's hands shook as she opened the door. "What did you find?" "Is it my mom?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mike knelt down to her level, his expression grim. "We found something big, but your mom's not here." Tamara's heart dropped. "What do you mean? Where is she?" Mike sighed deeply, standing up. "We don't know, but we did find something that ties those men to her. Something that connects them to a bigger picture." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. "Tamara, these men aren't just random criminals. They're part of something much bigger. We think your mom might have been involved in something dangerous." Tamara shook her head, her mind struggling to make sense of what Mike was saying. "What do you mean? My mom's just a regular woman. She's never been involved in anything bad." Mike exchanged a look with the other workers before turning back to Tamara. "We're not saying your mom was involved in anything criminal, but she might have been caught in the middle of something she didn't know about. These men, whoever they are, they've been keeping secrets, and we think they've been using her somehow. Tamara's eyes filled with tears. But she's a good person. She'd never do anything wrong. Why would they do this to her? Mike placed a hand on her shoulder. I know, kid. We're going to get to the bottom of this. But you need to stay strong. We have to keep moving. The workers gathered around, talking amongst themselves, strategizing their next steps. They knew the situation was dangerous, but they couldn't back down. Not now. They had to find out who was behind all of this and why they were targeting Tamara's mother. The team loaded back into their vehicles, and Mike motioned for Tamara to get into the truck with him. We're going to follow the trail. Stay with us, and we'll make sure you're safe. As the truck pulled away, Tamara felt a mix of fear and determination flood her chest. She didn't know what the workers had found or who these men were, but one thing was clear. Her mother was in danger, and it was up to her to make sure she wasn't forgotten. The truck rumbled through the quiet streets, heading toward a nearby warehouse district that the workers had identified as a possible lead. The area was dark, the streets deserted, and the air smelled of oil and rust. It felt like the kind of place where bad things happened in the shadows, hidden from the light. As they approached the warehouse, Mike slowed the truck and motioned for everyone to stop. They got out cautiously, checking their surroundings. Mike led the way, his hand resting on his holstered sidearm. Stay close, he whispered to Tamara. The workers moved silently, their eyes scanning the area. It was then that they saw it. A black SUV parked near the back of the warehouse, its engine idling. The hairs on the back of Mike's neck stood up. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. He signaled for the workers to spread out, surrounding the vehicle. As they closed in, a figure emerged from the shadows, wearing the same uniform that had been seen earlier, the uniform of the men who had taken Tamara's mother's bag. The man didn't look surprised to see them. He simply stepped forward, his face cold and calculating. I knew you'd come, he said, his voice low and menacing. Mike didn't flinch. Where is she? Where's Tamara's mom? The man smirked. You think you can stop this? You have no idea what you're dealing with. He motioned to the SUV. She's gone, and you're too late. The workers exchanged tense looks, their hands resting on their weapons. They had to act quickly. Mike stepped forward, his voice steady. Not too late. We're not walking away from this until we have answers. The man's smirk faded, and he stepped back, his hand reaching for something inside the SUV. Mike's heart raced as he prepared for what was to come next. Whatever happened next, they couldn't afford to lose. Tamara had to get her mother back. The clock was ticking, and time was running out. Tamara felt her pulse quicken as she watched the man reach for something inside the SUV. The air was thick with tension, and every instinct in her body screamed for her to run, but she knew she couldn't. Her mother was out there somewhere, and she had to stay strong. Mike and the workers were moving in, their eyes locked on the man in the uniform, ready for anything. What do you want? Mike's voice cut through the silence, calm but firm. The man sneered, his hand still hovering inside the SUV. What do I want? It's too late for you to stop me, he replied, his voice low and dripping with malice. You've already lost. Mike took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. Where is she? Where's Tamara's mom? The man smiled, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Slowly, he pulled a small, metallic device from the SUV. It looked like a remote of some kind, and for a brief moment, Tamara's heart stopped. You're too late, the man repeated, pressing a button on the remote. A loud clicking sound echoed from a nearby building. Mike's eyes widened. He knew something was wrong. What did you do? He demanded. The man's smile grew wider. I made sure that no one would find her. She's gone. All of you, too. You won't get in my way again. Mike was about to react when suddenly, a roar of engines filled the air. Tamara's eyes snapped to the street, and she saw a convoy of motorcycles speeding toward them. The workers froze, looking over their shoulders, their hands on their weapons. Tamara's heart skipped a beat as she realized who was behind the roar of the engines. The bikers. They had come for her. As the motorcycles screeched to a halt, the riders dismounted, their leather jackets and helmets shining under the streetlights. The sound of their boots hitting the pavement sent a chill down her spine. She didn't know who they were, but she knew one thing. They were here to help. Mike looked at the bikers, then back at the man in the uniform. You don't know who you're dealing with, Mike warned, his voice low. The man in the uniform sneered, unafraid. You think these thugs are going to stop me? But the bikers didn't flinch. They stood tall, their eyes locked on the man. We don't take kindly to people hurting kids, one of the bikers said, his voice deep and steady. And we definitely don't let anyone threaten families. The man in the uniform's expression shifted. For the first time, he seemed to hesitate. You're making a mistake, he warned, his voice shaky. The leader of the bikers stepped forward. The only mistake here is thinking you can get away with it, he said, his voice cold and filled with authority. You're done. Before the man could react, one of the bikers grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the side of the SUV. Where is she? The biker demanded. The man's eyes darted around, and for a moment, it looked like he might break. But then, just as quickly, his resolve hardened. You'll never find her. She's gone, he said through clenched teeth. The biker tightened his grip. Not if we can help it, he replied. Another biker stepped forward, his face filled with determination. We'll find her. And when we do, you'll regret this. The man let out a bitter laugh. You don't know what you're up against. This isn't just about a missing woman. This is about something much bigger. Something you can't stop. The leader of the bikers raised an eyebrow. Try us, he said, stepping back and motioning to his crew. They all moved in unison, surrounding the man. We'll find out exactly what this is about. And you're going to tell us everything. The man's smirk faded, and he took a step back, realizing that he had no way out. The bikers were ready to take him down, no matter the cost. As the situation began to escalate, Mike quickly motioned for the others to search the area. They needed to find Tamara's mother, and they couldn't waste any more time. Stay close, Tamara, Mike said, looking at her with a reassuring smile. We'll get your mom back. I promise. The bikers, now fully mobilized, split up to search the area, moving with precision and speed. Tamara watched them with a mix of awe and fear. They were here for her mother, and they weren't going to stop until they found her. The man in the uniform, seeing his plans unraveling, tried to fight back, but the bikers weren't having it. They had all the time in the world, and they would do whatever it took to make sure justice was served. The streets were alive with the sound of revving engines as the bikers searched every corner of the area. Tamara stayed close to Mike, her heart pounding with every passing second. She couldn't believe this was happening. Just hours ago, she had been alone and afraid, but now, she was surrounded by people who cared, people who were willing to risk everything to help her. The feeling of safety she had longed for was finally within reach. And as the bikers continued their search, Tamara knew that no matter what happened next, she wouldn't be alone again. Tamara stood beside Mike, her heart racing as the tension in the air grew heavier with each passing moment. The bikers were still searching the area, their eyes scanning every corner, every alley, every possible hiding spot. Tamara couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. She had to find her mother. She had to know that her mom was okay. Mike had promised her that they would get her mother back, but the fear gnawing at her insides was relentless. The man in the uniform, the one who had taunted them earlier, was being held back by two of the bikers. They were still interrogating him, demanding to know where her mother was. Mike paced back and forth, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. He could feel the pressure mounting, but he couldn't let Tamara see that. She had to stay strong. They all had to stay strong. We're not leaving without her, Mike muttered to himself. His voice was low, but Tamara heard it, and it gave her a sense of determination. She wasn't alone. They were all in this together. Just then, one of the bikers, a tall man named Jesse, jogged over to Mike. His face was serious, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. We found something, Jesse said, his voice urgent. Mike stopped pacing and turned to face him. What is it? There's a warehouse down the street. It's abandoned, but we think they're keeping her there, Jesse explained. We've got eyes on the place, but we need to move fast. They might be trying to move her again. Without hesitation, Mike nodded. Let's go. Tamara, stay close to me. As they made their way toward the warehouse, Tamara's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the fear threatening to overwhelm her. But she couldn't let it. Not now. Not when her mother was so close. The group moved quickly, their boots hitting the pavement in unison, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and imposing. It was a place of shadows, a place where secrets were hidden. Tamara swallowed hard, trying to push down the knot in her throat. They were so close, but what if they were too late? What if they had missed her? The closer they got, the more Tamara could feel the weight of the situation. She had to hold it together. Her mother was depending on her. As they reached the warehouse, Mike motioned for everyone to stop. They spread out, each one taking a position, ready to strike. Mike glanced at Tamara, his expression softening for a moment. "You're doing great, kid," he said, giving her a reassuring smile. Tamara nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but there was a determination in them now. She wasn't going to back down. "We'll get her back, Mike. I know we will." Mike's eyes softened, but he didn't say anything. He just nodded and turned back toward the warehouse. They had a job to do. The door to the warehouse was slightly ajar, and the darkness beyond it seemed to swallow the light from the street lamps. Mike took a deep breath and gestured for the team to move in. They slipped inside, the sound of their movements barely audible as they crept through the shadows. The warehouse was filled with rows of crates, old machinery, and piles of discarded materials. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but now it felt alive with danger. Every step they took seemed to echo in the vast, empty space. "Keep your eyes open," Mike whispered, his voice barely audible. "We don't know who or what we're dealing with here." As they moved deeper into the warehouse, Tamara's anxiety grew. She could feel the tension in the air, the thick silence that surrounded them. And then, she heard it. A muffled sound, coming from the back of the warehouse. It was faint at first, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. It was her mother's voice. She was here. They had found her. Without thinking, Tamara broke into a run, her legs carrying her toward the sound of her mother's voice. Mike shouted after her, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't let anything stand in her way. As she reached the back of the warehouse, Tamara saw her mother. She was tied to a chair, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. But when she saw Tamara, a flicker of relief crossed her face. "Tamara," her mother whispered, her voice weak. "You found me." Tears welled up in Tamara's eyes as she rushed to her mother's side. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not leaving you." Mike and the others quickly moved in, cutting the ropes that bound her mother's hands. The moment she was free, her mother collapsed into Tamara's arms, exhausted but alive. They had made it. The danger wasn't over yet, but for now, Tamara had her mother back. They weren't alone anymore. As they moved to leave the warehouse, Mike turned to one of the bikers, his face set in determination. "We need to make sure they don't get away. We have to stop them before they hurt anyone else." The biker nodded, his eyes filled with resolve. "We'll make sure of it," he said. "They won't get away with this." As they walked out into the night, Tamara felt the weight of everything that had happened. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to breathe. They had done it. They had saved her mother. And now, they would make sure the people responsible for all of this would never hurt anyone again. Tamara's heart raced as she held her mother, her arms trembling from the overwhelming relief. They had made it. After everything that had happened, after all the fear, the uncertainty, and the pain, her mother was safe. For now, that was enough. The bikers stood guard, their expressions determined and unwavering. Mike and the others had cleared the area, making sure no one else was in the warehouse, and now, they were all heading back toward their vehicles. Tamara's mother, still weak, clung to her daughter, her face pale, but showing signs of hope. "Thank you," her mother whispered, her voice hoarse. "You brought me back." Tamara smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her mother's face. "I told you I'd never leave. We're in this together." As they walked out into the cool night air, Tamara could feel the weight of what had just happened settling in. She couldn't help but glance over at Mike, who had been a steady presence throughout everything. He had kept his promise to her, and now her mother was safe. But there was still something lingering in the air, something that didn't sit right with Tamara. They had found her mother, but the man in the uniform and the people behind him, what were they after? What had they been planning? She had to know. Mike noticed the look on Tamara's face and walked over to her, his voice soft. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. "I'm fine," she replied, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "But I don't understand. Why were they after my mom? What was in that bag?" Mike sighed, his expression darkening. "I don't have all the answers, but we'll get to the bottom of this. I promise you that." Tamara nodded, though doubt still lingered in her mind. She knew Mike was doing everything he could, but the questions she had about the men who had taken her mother's bag kept swirling around her head. Why had they targeted her mom? And what did they want? As they got into the truck, the bikers led the way, their motorcycles rumbling as they drove through the quiet streets. Mike glanced at Tamara and her mother before turning his attention back to the road. "We're heading to a safe place now," he said. "We'll lay low for a bit, let the heat die down." Tamara's mother nodded weakly. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "We wouldn't have made it without you." "Your family now," Mike replied, his voice steady. "We take care of our own." The convoy of vehicles rolled through the empty streets, the only sounds the hum of the truck's engine and the rumbling of the motorcycles ahead. Tamara tried to calm her nerves, but the questions kept coming. The bag, the men, the secrets. She had to know what they had been planning, and she had to know why they had put her mother in danger. The truck made a sharp turn down a long, winding road, and soon they arrived at a secluded building at the edge of town. The bikers parked their motorcycles in a line, and Mike motioned for Tamara and her mother to follow him inside. The building was dimly lit, and the air inside was cool and dry. It felt like a safe haven, a place where they could rest and regroup. But as soon as they stepped inside, Mike's demeanor shifted. He moved swiftly, his eyes scanning the room, his body tense. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm. Tamara's mother, still fragile but now more aware of their surroundings, nodded and stayed close to her daughter. They followed Mike into the building's back room, where a few of the other bikers were already waiting. Mike locked the door behind them, and the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer just about getting her mother to safety. Now, it was about finding answers. Mike turned to face Tamara. "We've got a few more things to sort out," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of this, but it's not going to be easy. Those men weren't just random criminals. They were part of something bigger, and we need to figure out what." Tamara felt the weight of his words sink in. They hadn't just been after her mother. They had been after something else. Something bigger. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear that had been creeping up on her again. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike's eyes were sharp, filled with determination. "We make sure no one else gets hurt. We track down the people responsible for this, and we stop them before they can do any more damage. And we don't stop until we have all the answers." Tamara nodded, the resolve in her chest strengthening. She wasn't going to let her mother go through any more of this. They had come too far, and now they would finish what they started. The night was far from over, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Tamara felt like she had some control over what came next. The road ahead would be difficult, but she wasn't alone anymore, and neither was her mother. Tamara sat quietly in the dimly lit room, her mother resting beside her on the worn couch. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unanswered questions. Mike and the bikers were gathered around the table, their voices low as they discussed their next steps. Tamara's mind raced as she tried to process everything that had happened. She had her mother back, but the danger wasn't over yet. There was still so much they didn't know. As the conversation continued, one of the bikers, a tall man named Hank, spoke up. "We've been looking into these guys. The men in uniforms. We've got some connections, and we're starting to piece things together." Mike nodded, his brow furrowed. "What have you found?" Hank leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "These guys aren't just a local gang. They're connected to something much bigger, something that goes deeper than we thought. We've been tracking their movements for weeks, and they've been in and out of various locations, acting like they're part of a larger operation." Tamara's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of operation?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hank glanced at Mike before responding. "We don't know for sure yet, but we think it involves trafficking. Not just people, but information, money, possibly both." Tamara's blood ran cold. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "My mom didn't know about this." "She couldn't have," she said, her voice trembling. Mike placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a comforting squeeze. "I know, Tamara, but your mom's been caught in the crossfire. She didn't ask for this, and she certainly didn't deserve it." Tamara nodded, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Her mom had always worked hard, always tried to make the best life she could for them. But now, she had been dragged into something dangerous, something she couldn't control. "So what do we do now?" Tamara asked, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. Mike's eyes met hers, full of determination. "Now, we take them down. We find out who's behind this, and we make sure they can't hurt anyone else. We've come too far to stop now." The group began making plans, discussing their next moves in a hushed, urgent tone. Hank had contacts in law enforcement, people who could help them with the investigation. But even with all the information they had, Mike knew they had to move carefully. They couldn't afford to alert the people they were after. The last thing they needed was for the operation to go underground or worse, for anyone to get hurt. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the weight of the situation. The plan was simple: track down the source, gather evidence, and put an end to the operation before it could do more damage. But the path ahead was anything but easy. They would have to confront dangerous people, people who were willing to do whatever it took to protect their secrets. Tamara sat quietly, listening to the plan unfold, but her mind kept drifting back to her mother. Her mom had been so strong throughout everything. Tamara had always looked up to her, and now, she had to be strong for her. Mike turned to the group and gave a firm nod. We need to be ready for anything. Stay sharp. We're not just dealing with criminals. We're dealing with an organization that has power and influence. But we won't let them win. The bikers nodded, their expressions resolute. They had faced danger before, but this was different. This was personal. This wasn't just about justice. It was about protecting their own. As the meeting came to a close, Mike turned to Tamara. We're going to need your help, too, he said softly. Tamara looked up at him, surprised. My help? I don't know what I can do. Mike smiled, though his eyes remained serious. You've already done more than you know. You've brought us here. You've kept your head in the game. Now, we need to make sure that we get the information we need to bring these people down. We'll keep you safe, I promise. But we need you to stay with us. Tamara's heart swelled with gratitude. She didn't know if she was ready for what was to come, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let her mom down. She would stay strong. She would help them bring these people to justice. The next morning, the team gathered their things and set out. Tamara's mother was still too weak to join them, but she insisted on staying behind with one of the bikers, who promised to keep her safe. As Tamara climbed into the truck with Mike and the others, she felt a sense of purpose settle within her. She was no longer just a scared girl trying to find her mother. She was part of something bigger. They were going to take down the people who had hurt her family. As they drove down the road, the sun rising behind them, Tamara looked out the window and steeled herself for what was ahead. The road ahead was unknown, and there would be dangers waiting at every turn, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of clarity. They had a mission, and they were going to finish it, no matter what it took. Tamara's heart pounded in her chest as the truck rumbled down the quiet road, the sound of the tires against the asphalt echoing in her ears. The tension in the air was thick, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She sat beside Mike, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, her thoughts swirling in a mixture of fear and determination. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. They had a plan, but Tamara knew the danger wasn't over. The people behind her mother's kidnapping were dangerous, and every move they made brought them one step closer to finding out the truth. Mike glanced over at her, his face set in determination. We're getting closer, he said, his voice steady. Just stay focused, Tamara. We're not far from the next step. She nodded, trying to push aside the rising panic. Every time they got closer, the knot in her stomach tightened. What if they were too late? What if they never found the answers they needed? The road ahead was full of unknowns, but they had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. The truck pulled up to a small, unmarked building on the outskirts of town. It looked abandoned, its windows dark and boarded up, but Tamara could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was the place. This was where they were going to find the answers. Mike turned off the engine and looked at her. Stay close, he said, his voice low. We don't know what we're walking into, but we need to be prepared for anything. Tamara's breath hitched in her throat as she nodded, her fingers tightening around the door handle. The moment she stepped out of the truck, she could feel the cold air wrapping around her, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. This wasn't just another location, it was the key to everything. The bikers, who had followed them in their motorcycles, fanned out, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Mike led the way, his hand resting on the side of his gun. Tamara followed close behind, her heart racing as they approached the building. The closer they got, the more she could feel the danger in the air. They were walking into the heart of the operation. As they reached the front door, Mike motioned for them to stop. Everyone stay sharp, he whispered, his voice barely audible. The bikers nodded, their expressions serious. They had been through tough situations before, but something about this place felt different. Mike reached for the door handle, his hand steady, and pushed it open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a dark hallway that stretched out before them. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air, and Tamara's footsteps echoed in the silence as they moved inside. The room was empty, save for the faint sound of something scraping against the floor in the distance. Mike motioned for everyone to stay close as they made their way through the dark hallways, their eyes straining to adjust to the low light. They were looking for anything that could lead them to the people behind the operation, and most importantly, to the truth. They moved quickly, their boots silent on the wooden floors as they searched room after room. The tension was unbearable. Every corner they turned, every door they opened, could be the one that led them to their answers. Finally, they reached a large room at the back of the building. The door was slightly ajar, and as Mike pushed it open, a cold chill washed over them. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the walls lined with shelves full of boxes, documents, and equipment. It was clear that this place was more than just an abandoned building. It was a hub of activity, a place where things were being stored, hidden away. Mike signaled for the bikers to spread out and search the room. Tamara stood close to Mike, her heart pounding as they moved deeper into the room. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This could be the moment they found the truth. As Mike moved to the far side of the room, he spotted something. A large box sitting in the corner, partially covered by a tarp. He moved toward it, his hands shaking slightly as he lifted the tarp. Inside the box were stacks of cash, neatly organized and ready for transport. "This is it," Mike muttered, his voice grim. "We've found their operation." Tamara's stomach turned as she looked at the piles of money. This was more than just a kidnapping. This was a whole network, a system built on crime and deceit. And her mother had been caught in the middle of it. "What do we do now?" Tamara asked, her voice trembling. Mike didn't answer immediately. He was too focused on the evidence in front of him. After a moment, he turned to her, his face hard. "Now we expose them. We bring this to the authorities and make sure they can't hurt anyone else." But as Mike spoke, Tamara's eyes caught something else in the corner of the room. Another box, this one much smaller. It was locked, and something about it felt different. Something about it made her skin crawl. Without thinking, she moved toward it, her hand trembling as she reached for the lock. Mike turned just in time to stop her. "No, Tamara. We don't know what's in that box. It could be dangerous." But it was too late. Tamara had already opened it. Inside was a stack of photographs of her mother. But these weren't ordinary photos. They were taken in places Tamara recognized, places where her mother had been, places they had visited. But what caught her eye was the last photograph. It was a picture of her mother, standing in front of a man in a uniform, holding the same bag that had been taken from her. Tamara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the photo. The man in the uniform wasn't just anyone. It was the same man who had been part of the operation, the one who had taken her mother's bag. She turned to Mike, her face pale. "It's him," she whispered. "He's been following her." Mike's expression darkened. "We need to move, now?" This just got a whole lot more complicated. Tamara's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the photograph in her hands. The man in the uniform, the one who had been part of the operation, was clearly someone her mother had known. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her mother had been caught in something much deeper than she had ever imagined. The bag, the kidnappers, everything, it was all connected. The picture, though, was the key. It wasn't just a random shot, it was evidence. The man in the uniform was standing right there with her mother, clearly more than just a stranger. Her mother had been involved in this operation without even knowing the full extent of it. Mike stood frozen for a moment, his gaze locked on the photo in Tamara's hands. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "We need to find him," Mike said, his voice low and controlled. "We can't let him slip away again." Tamara looked up at him, her voice shaking. "How do we find him? Where do we even start?" Mike turned to face the group of bikers who had been standing silently behind them, watching the exchange. "We're going to need everything we can get. I want you all to dig through the information we've got, talk to your contacts. We can't leave anything to chance." The bikers nodded and immediately went to work, making phone calls, pulling up information on their phones, and even reaching out to some of their informants. The tension in the room was thick, and Tamara could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Her mind kept going back to the picture. Who was this man? What was his connection to her mother? And more importantly, what had he been planning all along? Mike paced the room, occasionally glancing at Tamara and her mother, who was sitting quietly in the corner, still recovering from the ordeal. Tamara could see the worry in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to solve a case. This was personal for him, too. He had promised to protect her and her mother, and now he was doing everything he could to keep that promise. We're going to find him, Mike muttered under his breath, his fists clenched. And when we do, we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone again. The room fell into a tense silence as everyone focused on their tasks. The weight of the situation was heavy on all of them, but they knew there was no turning back now. The stakes were higher than ever, and they couldn't afford to make a mistake. Hours passed as the bikers worked tirelessly, collecting information, reviewing the photograph, and trying to piece together any clues they could find. Tamara couldn't sit still any longer. She paced around the room, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Her mother had always been so careful, so protective of her. How had she gotten mixed up in all of this? And why hadn't she said anything? Had she known something was off? Or had she been completely unaware? Just as the silence became unbearable, one of the bikers, a woman named Lisa, walked into the room. "We've got a lead," Lisa said, her voice steady but urgent. Mike turned quickly, his eyes lighting up with hope. "What did you find?" Lisa held up a piece of paper. "This man," she said, pointing to the photograph Tamara was still holding. "His name is Richard Weller. He's been on our radar for a while. He's connected to a group called the Silvercrest Organization. They've been running a lot of illegal operations, from human trafficking to arms deals. But we never knew they had ties to this area." Tamara's breath caught in her throat. Silvercrest. She had heard rumors, whispers in the dark corners of the city about them, but she had never imagined her mother could be involved with them. "What do we know about him?" Mike asked, his voice sharp with focus. Lisa scanned the paper, her finger tracing the details. "Weller has a long history. He was military at one point, and after he left, he started getting involved with shady groups. He's known for working behind the scenes, making deals, pulling strings. But he's never been caught. Not once." Mike's face darkened. "We need to get to him before he disappears again. This guy is dangerous." Tamara felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at the photograph of Richard Weller. He was the key to everything. The man who had been hiding in the shadows, pulling strings, making deals. He was the one who had threatened her mother, who had taken her away from everything she knew. And now, she had to find him. "Where do we find him?" Tamara asked, her voice shaking but determined. Lisa looked up, meeting her gaze. "We're working on it. We've got a few people who can track him, but we'll need to move quickly. He won't stay in one place for long." Mike nodded. "Then we move fast. We don't wait for him to make the next move. We go to him." Tamara's heart raced as she realized that the moment they had been waiting for was finally here. This was their chance to take down the Silvercrest Organization, to stop the man who had been pulling the strings. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to back down. They were going to stop Richard Weller, and they were going to bring her mother's life back to normal. She would make sure of it. Tamara stood at the edge of the room, her hands clenched into fists as the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her chest. They had the lead on Richard Weller, but the clock was ticking, and every second they wasted could put her mother, and everyone involved, at greater risk. Mike paced back and forth, his focus intense, as the bikers continued to gather information. They were moving quickly, but Tamara could feel the urgency building with every passing moment. "We need to act fast," Mike said, his voice sharp and low. "We know where Weller's hiding, but we don't know how long he'll stay there." Tamara took a deep breath and nodded. "What's the plan?" Mike turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "We go in together. We don't let him slip away this time. We take him down before he has a chance to get away or hurt anyone else." The plan was simple but dangerous. They would move quickly, using their knowledge of the area and the contacts they had to surround the location. Mike had already spoken to a few trusted people who could help back them up, but Tamara knew that once they were in the thick of it, there would be no turning back. As the bikers began to gear up and load their vehicles, Tamara's thoughts raced. What would they find when they got there? Was Weller truly as dangerous as they believed? And most importantly, would they be able to stop him before he could hurt anyone else? She couldn't stop thinking about her mother, about everything they had been through, everything they had lost. But now they were so close. They had to finish what they had started. The convoy of bikers and Mike's truck rolled out of the building's parking lot, heading toward the outskirts of town. The wind whipped past them as they drove, the engines of the motorcycles roaring in unison. Tamara could feel the tension building as they neared their destination. She stayed close to Mike, her eyes scanning the area, her heart pounding in her chest. They were getting closer. The small, isolated warehouse was just ahead, its dark silhouette looming against the night sky. They had arrived. Mike's truck pulled into a spot across the street, and the bikers parked their motorcycles in strategic positions, making sure they had a clear view of every entrance. Tamara's stomach churned as she stepped out of the truck, the cool night air biting at her skin. She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. What would they find inside? Were they ready for what was to come? Stay close, Mike said, his voice firm. We move quickly and quietly. We're going to get Weller, but we need to stay sharp. The group moved into position, their movements coordinated and silent. Mike led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Tamara stayed close behind him, her steps careful but steady. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but there was no turning back now. They had to end this. As they reached the entrance to the warehouse, Mike paused, signaling for everyone to stop. He motioned for two of the bikers to take the left side of the building while he, Tamara, and the rest of the group moved to the right. The air was thick with tension as they moved swiftly, their hearts racing as they neared the building's main doors. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the quiet night, the weight of their mission heavy in the air. Mike reached for the door, and with a quick motion, he swung it open. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, the air stale and thick with the scent of dust and old machinery. It was eerily quiet, and the only sound was the faint hum of a generator somewhere in the distance. They moved cautiously, checking every corner and every shadow. Tamara's heart raced as they made their way deeper into the warehouse. The last thing they needed was to walk into a trap. They reached a large, open area in the center of the warehouse, and Mike signaled for them to stop. He motioned for two of the bikers to take positions near the far door, while he, Tamara, and the others continued to move forward. They were getting closer. We're almost there, Mike whispered. Stay sharp. Tamara's breath caught in her throat as they reached a small office near the back of the warehouse. She could hear voices coming from inside. Weller's voice, low and muffled. He was here. They had found him. Mike looked at Tamara and gave her a brief nod. This is it. Stay behind me, he said. He signaled for the others to move into position. Tamara's pulse raced as they crept closer to the door. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to act, to burst through the door and confront Weller, but she knew they had to be patient. They had to make sure they didn't alert him. Mike reached for the door handle, his hand steady but tense. With a quick motion, he opened the door. Inside, Richard Weller stood with his back to them, speaking to someone on the phone. As soon as Mike stepped inside, Weller turned, his eyes widening in shock. You, he hissed, his voice low and filled with venom. You've been following me. Mike stepped forward, his voice cold and filled with authority. This ends now, Weller. You're going down. Weller's face twisted in rage as he reached for something hidden on the desk. Without thinking, Mike lunged forward, grabbing Weller's arm before he could pull whatever it was out. The rest of the bikers stormed in, surrounding Weller and forcing him to the ground. Tamara stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as they took control of the situation. This was it. Weller was finally in their grasp. And with that, the first part of the battle was over. But they knew this was just the beginning. Weller would talk, and they would finally learn everything. They would find out who was behind the operation and bring them all to justice. But for now, they had won. Weller had been caught, and they had taken the first step toward ending this nightmare. Tamara stood in the dim light of the warehouse, her heart still pounding as she watched Mike and the other bikers handle Richard Weller. He was on the ground, his hands bound behind his back, his face twisted in fury and frustration. Tamara couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. After all the fear and uncertainty, it felt like a victory. They had Weller, and now they could finally learn the truth about what had been going on, about the dark web of crime her mother had accidentally gotten tangled up in. Mike stepped forward, his voice calm but firm as he addressed Weller. You've been running this operation for far too long. And now, you're going to tell us everything. Who are you working for? What's this all really about? Weller glared up at him, his jaw clenched. You think you can just waltz in here and take me down? You don't know who you're messing with. Mike's expression remained unchanged. We already know more than you think. The only thing left to do is get you talking. The choice is yours. Weller spit on the floor, the defiance still burning in his eyes. You're wasting your time. You'll never get the full story. Not from me. One of the bikers, a tall man named Jax, stepped forward. We've got time, and we know how to make you talk. Weller's eyes flicked nervously between the group, and for a brief moment, Tamara saw the fear in his eyes. He knew they weren't bluffing. Mike took a step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. You're going to tell us everything, and you're going to tell us now. If not, you'll be buried in a world of trouble that you'll never escape from. We'll bring down everyone involved. Weller's anger flared again, but this time, there was a hint of panic behind it. He had been caught, and there was no way out. You think you're the only ones who can stop this? Weller hissed, his voice laced with venom. There are bigger forces at play than you could ever imagine. This isn't just about me. It's about something much more dangerous, something you're not prepared for. Mike didn't flinch. You're going to tell us who? Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings? Weller hesitated, his lips trembling as he weighed his options. Finally, with a defeated sigh, he spoke. Fine. I'll talk. But you have no idea what you're getting yourselves into. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the chance to bring down the operation, to expose the people who had been terrorizing her family. It's the Silvercrest organization, Weller muttered, his voice trembling. They've been running things from the shadows for years. Not just trafficking and money laundering, but corruption at every level. Cops, politicians, everyone is on their payroll. And your mother? She got too close. She didn't even know what she was getting into when she started working with them. Tamara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. She had always known her mother had been working hard to provide for them, but this? She had no idea. What was her role in all of this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Weller's eyes narrowed as he looked at her, the smugness replaced by a flicker of fear. She didn't know, but she was important. She had access to certain things that they needed. She was used, manipulated. Tamara's mind raced. How had her mother gotten involved in this mess without realizing it? And now, you're going to help us bring it all down, Mike said, his tone firm. Weller let out a bitter laugh. You think you can just walk in and stop them? You're nothing. They're too big. You'll never get close to them. Mike leaned down, getting in Weller's face. That's where you're wrong. We have you. And we have your people. Now, you're going to lead us to them. Or else we make your life a living hell. The tension in the room was suffocating. Tamara's heart beat in her chest, her thoughts spinning with everything she had just learned. Her mother had been unknowingly involved in something much larger than she had ever imagined. And now, it was up to them to stop it. You think you're the only one with connections? Weller said, a wicked glint in his eye. They'll find you. They'll come for you. And they'll make sure you pay. Mike stood tall, undeterred by Weller's threat. Let them come, he said coldly. We'll be ready. There was a brief silence before Weller spoke again, his voice low. I'll give you the names. But I'm telling you, you won't survive this. No one does. Mike nodded. We'll see about that. As the bikers moved in to take control of the situation, Mike turned to Tamara. We're going to end this. We're not letting anyone else get hurt. Your mom's going to be okay. We'll make sure of it. Tamara looked at her mother, who was still sitting in the corner, her face pale, but relieved. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were filled with gratitude. Tamara walked over to her, her heart swelling with emotion. We're going to take care of this, Mom, she said softly. We'll make sure it's all over soon. Her mother nodded, tears filling her eyes as she reached out to embrace Tamara. For the first time in weeks, Tamara felt a sense of peace. They weren't done yet, but they were closer than ever to putting an end to the nightmare. And nothing, not even Silvercrest, was going to stand in their way. Tamara's hands shook as she sat beside her mother in the quiet room, the weight of everything they had just uncovered settling heavily on her chest. Richard Weller had given them the names, but the real challenge was just beginning. They now had the information they needed, but it was still a race against time. The Silvercrest organization was more dangerous than they could have ever imagined, and Weller's words kept echoing in Tamara's mind. You won't survive this. No one does. Despite the chilling warning, Mike's resolve never wavered. He had promised to bring down Silvercrest, and now that promise had a face. The bikers, gathered around, were ready. Every one of them had their own reasons for being involved, for standing up and fighting. They had become more than just a group of strangers. This was a family, and nothing would break them apart. Mike looked at Tamara, his face serious. We've got what we need. Now we move. We take down Silvercrest once and for all. Tamara nodded, her mind still processing the magnitude of it all. Where do we start? She asked. Mike motioned to the map laid out on the table. We've got intel on their operations. We know where they're meeting. But this isn't just about hitting one place. It's about hitting them all at once, overwhelming them. Tamara's stomach churned. It sounded like a plan that could backfire, but she trusted Mike. He wasn't leading them into danger without a plan. What do you need me to do? She asked, her voice steady, even though her nerves were on edge. Mike gave her a quick glance. Stay close. You've already proven you're tougher than most. We're going to need you for the next part of this. She nodded, determination hardening in her chest. They were in this together. Now, Mike turned back to the group. We're going to hit every safe house we know about. The more of their network we can destroy, the harder it'll be for them to regroup. We can't afford to leave anyone behind. The bikers moved quickly, preparing for what was ahead. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was also a sense of purpose. They were no longer just hunting criminals. They were stopping a machine built on corruption and pain. As the team prepped for their mission, Tamara felt a hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see her mother, her face pale but resolute. I'm staying here, her mother said softly. You all have a job to do, and I trust you. Tamara could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else, strength. Mom, you've been through enough. Her mother shook her head. This isn't just about me. This is about stopping them from hurting anyone else. You've got to do this. I'll be okay. Tamara's heart swelled with pride and love for her mother. She had always thought of her as strong, but this was more than she could have ever imagined. Mike gave a quick nod to the team, signaling for everyone to get ready. It's time, he said, his voice low but full of authority. The bikers mounted their motorcycles, engines roaring to life, the sound echoing into the night. Tamara climbed into the truck with Mike, her heart racing as they sped toward the first location. It was a small, nondescript building on the edge of town, but it held the key to taking down Silvercrest. The trucks and motorcycles were parked in strategic spots, and the group spread out to surround the building. The operation was about to begin. Mike and Tamara moved toward the entrance, their steps silent but deliberate. As they approached the door, Mike's eyes locked with hers. You're not alone in this, Tamara, he said quietly, his words carrying a sense of reassurance. She looked back at him and nodded, her fear tempered by his confidence. I know. Mike pushed the door open, and the team moved in. The interior of the building was dark, with shadows stretching across the floor. But the group moved with precision, each person knowing exactly where to go. The air was thick with tension as they moved deeper into the building. There. Footsteps muffled by the concrete floor. Clear, one of the bikers called out, moving swiftly through the building. They were methodical, checking every room, every corner. But they had to be quick. This wasn't just about finding Weller's associates. It was about finding the heart of the operation. Tamara's pulse quickened as they moved further into the building, the silence around them eerie. They had to act fast. Weller had been right about one thing. Silvercrest was connected to everything. This was no small-time operation. As they reached the main room, Mike held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. The door was slightly ajar, and through the small crack, they could see two figures talking inside. Mike motioned for two bikers to flank the door, and they moved into position. He turned to Tamara. Stay behind me, he said, his voice steady. She nodded, her grip tightening on the truck door's edge. The tension was unbearable as the seconds ticked by. Mike slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. Inside, two men stood around a table, papers scattered in front of them. They didn't see the team enter. You have to stop them, one of the men said, glancing nervously at the papers. The other man smiled darkly. There's no stopping Silvercrest. They own everything. The moment you think you have them, they've already moved on. Mike stepped forward, his voice firm. Not anymore. The two men froze as they realized they weren't alone. The bikers quickly surrounded them, securing the area. Tamara could feel her heart beating faster. They had found one of the many pieces to the puzzle, But it wasn't over yet. They still had to tear down the entire operation, and they couldn't afford to slip up now. They had Weller's people, and they had the evidence. Now, it was time to finish what they had started. Tamara stood still, the weight of the moment settling over her as she watched the bikers secure the two men inside the building. They had finally infiltrated Silvercrest's operation, and the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. But as the silence stretched on, her thoughts raced. They had gathered the evidence, exposed the organization, and now there was just one more thing left to do. Make sure no one could ever rebuild what Silvercrest had built. Mike stood beside her, his expression grim but determined. "We've got what we need," he said, his voice low. "But we can't stop here. We bring it all to light, everyone involved. This is bigger than just taking down a few bad guys. It's about exposing a system of corruption that goes deep." Tamara nodded, understanding the gravity of it all. The fight wasn't just about getting justice for her mother anymore. It was about stopping the cycle of crime and manipulation that had been hurting so many people for so long. "We've got to make sure the people who are still out there never have the chance to hurt anyone again," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Mike looked at her, a small, approving nod. "That's the plan. We bring them down, all of them." The bikers were already in motion, their calls to contacts and law enforcement setting things into motion. It felt like everything had reached a tipping point. The world they had been living in, one of fear, uncertainty, and constant danger, was finally about to shift. With Weller in custody and the operation exposed, Tamara felt a deep breath of relief, but it wasn't over yet. Mike moved toward the group, his voice taking on an authoritative edge as he addressed the crew. "We've got a job to do, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We need to get these men to the authorities and ensure Silvercrest doesn't crawl out of the shadows. The fight isn't over until they're all in jail." Tamara watched as the bikers moved quickly, their motions fluid, their purpose clear. They had become a family, a force that had taken on something far bigger than any of them could have imagined. They weren't just a group of bikers anymore. They were the justice that had been long denied. The drive back was quiet. The streets that had once seemed filled with uncertainty now felt like they were leading towards something brighter. They had done it. Tamara had done it. Her mom was safe, and for the first time in a long time, Tamara could finally feel a weight lifting off her shoulders. As they reached their destination, Mike turned to her. "You did good, kid. You kept your head through all of this." Tamara smiled weakly, her exhaustion starting to catch up with her. "I couldn't have done it without you. I couldn't have done it without everyone." Mike chuckled. "Well, we were a team, and that's what makes the difference." As they arrived at their safe house, the bikers started unloading the men they had caught, ready to hand them over to the authorities. Tamara stayed close to Mike, watching as the situation unfolded. Her mom, still looking weary but strong, sat on the porch, her eyes scanning the activity around her. Tamara walked over and sat beside her, her heart finally beginning to ease. "It's over, Mom. We did it." Her mother's face softened as she placed a hand on Tamara's. "I don't know how to thank you, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Tamara leaned into her mother's embrace, feeling the warmth of safety finally wrap around them both. "I promised I wouldn't let anything happen to you," she whispered. And for the first time in a long while, she truly felt that promise had been kept. Mike approached them, his face serious but tinged with relief. "It's done. The authorities are moving in. Silvercrest won't be a problem anymore. Not for you. Not for anyone." Tamara's chest tightened, the full weight of what they had accomplished settling on her. She had been scared, uncertain, but they had finished it. They had taken down a network of criminals who had torn apart lives, including her own. And now, it was over. Her mom was safe. She was safe. The bikers had done what they set out to do, and they had kept their promise. "You've got a good crew here," her mom said, her voice filled with admiration as she watched the bikers prepare to leave. "You're all like family." Mike smiled. "We are family, and family looks out for each other." The last of the bikers climbed onto their motorcycles, ready to ride off into the night, the mission complete. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft glow over the quiet streets. Tamara stood beside her mother, feeling a quiet sense of peace for the first time in what felt like forever. They had fought together, and they had won. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Tamara felt like they could finally move forward. The battle was over, But her journey, was just beginning. In this gripping story, experience the intensity and thrill of Hell Angels stories as we follow Tamara, a young girl who embarks on a harrowing journey to rescue her mother from the clutches of a dangerous criminal network. After discovering her mother's unintended involvement with a powerful underground organization, Tamara teams up with a group of bikers to track down the man responsible and expose a corrupt system. Along the way, they uncover dark secrets, face life-threatening challenges, and come face to face with the ruthless forces that threaten their lives. From high-stakes confrontations to daring rescue missions, Hell Angel Stories takes you deep into a world of danger and redemption. The bikers, led by Mike, demonstrate unwavering loyalty and bravery, forming a tight-knit family bound by a shared mission to protect their own. As the story unfolds, secrets unravel, and justice is finally served, with the bikers taking down the criminals responsible for countless acts of violence. The tension and suspense in Hell Angel Stories keep you on the edge of your seat until the very end. With relentless action and compelling characters, this story delivers a powerful message of resilience and courage, proving that when family is at stake, no obstacle is too great to overcome. Whether you're a fan of thrilling crime dramas or just love the grit and determination of Hell Angel Stories, this tale will leave you captivated and inspired. Join Tamara and the bikers on their journey for justice, where they will stop at nothing to bring down those who seek to destroy lives.